Jason Licht says the Falcons should be picked to win the division. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message, no ads or hashtags or anything like that. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. The practice squad is set, and we look at the success the Bucs have had in recent years in the NFL draft. But let's start with the fact that Jason Licht, the general manager of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, said that people should be picking the Falcons to win the division. So when Jason spoke with the media on Wednesday, he was asked by friend of the show, Rock Riley, what he thought about people picking the Falcons to win the NFC South. And Licht said bluntly, that's great. Rock then asked him if he was still keeping receipts, and Licht said, quote, only when they take shots, but they should be picking the Falcons, end quote. Now, am I going to go on a diatribe or one of my always popular soapboxes to talk about how it's absolutely insane for the GM of the Buccaneers to say that people should be picking another team to win their division? Absolutely not, because this is classic Jason, and I, for one, am here for it. We talked over the summer about some of the interviews that Jason had and appearances that he made throughout the offseason. And one of the things that he mentioned on one of those appearances was that sometimes it felt like the Bucs were in witness protection. No one really paid any attention to them. They were the forgotten team around the NFL down there in Florida, and that the Buccaneers like it that way. It's kind of, it's that kind of sentiment that fuels an answer like they should be picking the Falcons. Jason, and I'm sure Todd Bowles, Baker Mayfield, Tristan, Levante, Mike, Chris, all those guys probably all feel like the Bucs are once again being overlooked and underappreciated, and that's what they thrive on. It's the doubt, it's the disrespect, it's the, well, you just brought your own guys back, and the Falcons got Kirk Cousins and Justin Simmons and Matthew Judon and blah, 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 blah. It's that type of mentality that led to the Bucs being picked to end up in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes last season. You mean you're going to take a quarterback like Baker Mayfield, okay? Stay with me here. And that guy has a chip on his shoulder the size of a Carnival cruise ship. And you're going to make that chip even bigger by continuing to doubt him. You're going to take a guy like Antoine Winfield Jr., who should have been the defensive player of the year last year, and tell him that he can't stop Kirk Cousins? You're going to tell Todd Bowles that he's not capable of beating Raheem Morris out for his third straight division title and the team's fourth straight division title? Come on, man. You've got anonymous defensive coordinators out there talking to Mike Sando of The Athletic saying that Baker Mayfield is nothing more than a good system quarterback. That's not hyperbole. That's what happened. This anonymous defensive coordinator said, quote, he can sling it. If he is coached well and he feels good, he is a good system quarterback. He can get rolling and make some plays. He doesn't scare me. With some of those twos, you are like, oh, bleep, I have to do something to stop them. I don't feel that with Baker. He's a guy where we can play our stuff and be fine, end quote. For reference, when that coordinator said those twos, he was talking about Mike Sando's quarterback tiers, and he was referring to those players that were in the second tier, players like Jordan Love and Kirk Cousins. Mayfield was in the third tier, and this coordinator basically insinuated that you don't have to game plan for Baker Mayfield. You can go out there and play whatever kind of defense you want, and you're going to be able to beat him. That he's not a player that's even on Kirk Cousins level, which is completely asinine because Baker has had more success overall than Kirk Cousins. He's not some just gaudy regular season 1:00 or 4:00 kickoff stat patter. He can win in prime time. He can win in the postseason, and he didn't waste the prime of the careers of Stephon Diggs, Dalvin Cook, and I mean, Justin Jefferson's still in his prime, but what did he do with Justin Jefferson? Nothing. Bupkis. I hope whoever that defensive coordinator is that talked to Sando has to face the Buccaneers this year and gets absolutely shredded, because that would be the definition of mess around and find out. All of this, though, is to refer back to the original point. The Bucs like being taken for granted and counted out and ignored and underestimated. They feed off of it. They embrace it. And for a team that still has quite a few Super Bowl champions on it, they would love nothing more than to have all of the critics and all of the doubters and all of the naysayers have to eat their words for a second consecutive season. So no, Jason Licht isn't saying people should pick the Falcons because he truly believes that people should pick the Falcons. He's saying it because he knows that that is the kind of receipt that he keeps. That is the kind of bulletin board material that gets players like Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans and Antoine and Levante hyped up to go out and say, no, screw you guys. We're going to do what we've done the last 4 years, and we're going to go out and we're going to make the playoffs. We're going to win the division again. That's what Jason Licht means. More talk about Jason Licht coming up, but this time it's about his drafting prowess. That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, you all know that I have a crazy schedule. I'm up at 3:30 in the morning. I'm racing around the greater Eastern time zone with my son's hockey commitments. There's always something going on. And that's why when I get to work or we have a 7 a.m. puck drop, I'm taking a 5-hour energy to get my day started off right. I love the fact that it's sugar-free and I can just throw it in my pocket before I walk out the door. I personally am a huge fan of the berry flavor. That's my go-to. But it also comes in tropical burst, grape, and a delicious watermelon. So there is a flavor for everyone. You know, you can find them at the cash register at nearly every convenience, grocery, and drugstore across the nation. And if you go to 5hourenergy.com, you can build your own 12 or 24 pack so you get the perfect mix of all the flavors that you love. So go to 5hourenergy.com. That's the number 5hourenergy.com and get some 5-Hour Energy product today. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONFB, LOCKEDONFB, to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I had someone reach out to me the other day to ask if all the Bucs draft picks from this year made the team? The answer, of course, was yes. In fact, 44 of the 53 players on the roster were either drafted by the Bucs or signed by the Bucs as an undrafted free agent. They go from one of the oldest teams in the NFL to one of the youngest teams in the NFL, and it's all due to their outstanding scouting and drafting. Jason Licht was asked about it and said, quote, "It starts with my staff. I'll always say that. They do a phenomenal job. We've been together a long time. John Spytek, Mike Greenberg, Mike Beal, Rob McCartney, my scouts. I could sit here all day and I would name every single one of them, so I don't want to leave one of them out. They do a phenomenal job. They know what I'm looking for when they present it to me, and they whittle it down, and I look at the players and make the final decision along with Todd, but I make the final decision. Then I'm not having to swim through a lot of things. No, this isn't what I want. We're all aligned. That's number one. Number two, just because a lot of players make your team draft picks doesn't mean that that's good. In our case, we think it is. We think that they're all very good players, but you could select 15 guys and then I could tell Todd they're all making the team and they could be no good. In this case, they are. We're excited about them. I love the process that we have with the coaches and how they're involved, and we all get along, end quote. The players on the roster not drafted by Tampa or signed initially by the Bucs as an undrafted free agent: Baker Mayfield, Ben Bredeson, Royce Newman, Greg Gaines, Tavier Thomas, Bryce Hall, Chase McLaughlin, and Ernest Brown. That's it. That's your list. This team has been an absolute unit in terms of identifying and developing young talent into a team of contenders. Every year, this team has a shot at the postseason, and this year, their chances of advancing further than last year are even higher with the weaknesses they addressed and the way in which they addressed them. The reason this is so important goes beyond the Bucs' ability to win this year or next year. It speaks to their ability to be a viable contender for the foreseeable future. Think of the teams around the NFL that are constantly being talked about as being Super Bowl contenders, being in the running for the ultimate prize. You got Kansas City Chiefs, San Francisco, Cincinnati, Baltimore, Green Bay, Detroit as of late. Go back, not too distant into the future, into the past. And think about a team like New Orleans, who year in, year out was talked about as being a Super Bowl contender. The Patriots during the Tom Brady years, 20 years of being a contender. They are all teams that drafted well year in and year out. They make the occasional splash in free agency or via trade, but the bulk of those teams were built through the draft. That's what the Bucs are looking to do. Build the core of the team through the draft. Reward your players when it comes time. Mike, Antoine, Tristan, Levante. Sprinkle in a couple of needed free agents, Baker, Jordan. Then put yourself in a position when you can win the division every year and get into the playoffs. David and I used to say it all the time on this show. You just need a ticket to the dance. Once you get in, anything can happen. And last year is a perfect example. The Bucs went toe-to-toe with the Detroit Lions in a very hostile environment and nearly pulled off the comeback. And then Detroit goes on to the NFC Championship, where it looked like they were going to run away with it. And I'm still really not sure what happened in terms of that just all-time collapse in that game. But this year, the Bucs get to play all four teams that played on championship weekend: San Francisco, Detroit, Kansas City, Baltimore. All the teams I just mentioned as being yearly contenders that built their foundation through great drafting with little free agent or trade additions sprinkled in throughout. Those games are going to tell us a lot about who the Buccaneers are and who they can be and where they still need to improve if they're going to be talked about in the same breath. All four of those teams are going to greatly test the Buccaneers pass rush and their secondary. They're going to try to put a lot of pressure on Baker Mayfield, and they're going to be relentless in their attempt to shut down Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and the other offensive weapons. Where can the Bucs gain an advantage, and where are they going to fall short? My guess right now, a little over a week before the regular season begins, they're going to struggle more against Kansas City and Baltimore than they are San Francisco and Detroit because of the mobility of the quarterbacks. Without that edge rush being able to get into the backfield quickly and disrupt things, those edge guys are going to have to keep contained and force the quarterbacks to stay in the pocket, which is easier said than done with Lamar Jackson especially. But you have to allow the interior guys to generate the pressure on those mobile quarterbacks. Lamar is an absolute cheat code, and he is going to pull it down and run effectively all game long. He did it to them the last time they played. He does it to everybody. And I will say this: if the Buccaneers do not make the playoffs this year, that doesn't necessarily mean that the season was a failure. Now, it certainly could mean that it was a failure depending on how or why they missed the playoffs. But those two are not mutually exclusive. The Bucs are absolutely loaded with young talent, and it's going to be loaded with young talent for quite a while. As I mentioned the other day, only 3 players on the team are 30 years old or older. But with all that youth comes inexperience. The Bucs may end up struggling a little this year and missing the playoffs. I've said time and time again, I believe their floor is 8 wins, and that certainly isn't winning the division or getting you into the postseason this year. But the building blocks of a long-term contender is the most important thing to take away from the year. Do they have the kind of team that will be an annual contender that can make a deep playoff run and get back to the Super Bowl? This is a very, very different type of team following their Super Bowl win in Super Bowl 55 compared to Super Bowl 37, when things went south pretty quickly and you were on a roller coaster every single year. They win the division, they come in last place. They win the division, they come in third place. This is a completely different layout, and you don't have that roller coaster, and you're not waiting nearly 2 decades for their next playoff win. They have a playoff win in 2 out of the last 3 postseasons following that Super Bowl championship. So what's happening now is vital to the Buccaneers' success, not just this year, not just next year, but we're talking about over the course of the next decade. The practice squad is set, and the Bucs make an interesting addition. That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. All know how much I love going to live events, concerts, sporting events. I'm constantly talking about on this show about a concert or a game that I'm getting ready to go see. And the first place I'm checking out when I look for tickets is Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. In fact, if you're interested in seeing the Dodgers take on the Diamondbacks on Labor Day, you can get tickets for 50% off exclusively on Game Time while supplies last. You know, I've used Game Time for everything from the NBA to the NHL to college basketball to concert tickets. And with all-in pricing, I know exactly what I'm going to spend up front, so there's no surprise when I get to checkout. I also have the knowledge of using Game Time's lowest price guarantee, so that if I find tickets in the same section and row for cheaper, Game Time is going to credit me 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Wrapping things up here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, and the Buccaneers have announced their practice squad, which includes a really interesting addition. So, the Bucs practice squad is as follows: safety Marcus Banks, defensive lineman CJ Brewer and Mike Green, linebacker Antonio Greer Jr., edge rusher Daniel Griziak, offensive lineman Luke Haggard and Avery Jones, and Lorenz Metz, linebacker Vi Jones, wide receivers Ryan Miller, Sterling Shepard, Cody Thompson, tight end Tanner Taula, punter Seth Vernon, running back DJ Williams, and safety Rashad Wisdom. Then on Thursday, the Bucs officially made the addition of quarterback Michael Pratt, giving him their last practice squad spot. What's so interesting about this is that it means, first, John Wolford's time in Tampa is definitely done. And Wolford is a guy that had played for Liam Cohen. There was a familiarity there. There was a relationship there, but it wasn't enough. John Wolford's time in Tampa is officially done. Second, it means that the Bucs may have their quarterback too, after spending a year on the practice squad, getting to know Liam Cohen's offense, getting used to the team. And then if Kyle Trask decides to leave as a free agent next year, the Bucs don't have to use a draft pick or use cap space to sign a backup for Baker. He's already going to be on the roster with a year of this offense under his belt. Pratt was a 7th-round pick in this year's draft by the Green Bay Packers and was waived on August 27th. The Bucs already had interest in Pratt during the draft process, and they were looking at him as a potential undrafted free agent. Unfortunately, he gets taken towards the end of the draft, but fortunately, the Packers didn't want to keep him, and they let him go. Pratt, for those that don't know, played for Tulane and completed 61% of his passes over 45 games, finishing with 9,602 yards, 90 touchdowns, and 26 interceptions. He was the AAC Offensive Player of the Year in 2023, throwing for over 2,400 yards, 22 touchdowns, and just 5 interceptions. Pratt is a really fun player to watch. And I know a lot of people on social media were having a grand old time talking about how Pratt beat number 1 pick Caleb Williams in a bowl game. Let's not kid ourselves. Caleb Williams was the better quarterback on the field, but Pratt led the game-winning drive and had to convert 2 4th downs before throwing the game-winning touchdown. So I'm not going to diminish Pratt's accomplishment, but I'm also not going to say that he outdueled Caleb Williams either. Williams had 5 touchdowns in that game. Pratt had 2, but he had the most important one because it was the one that won the game. I like this move a lot by the Buccaneers. I really do. If they are able to get Pratt up to speed, giving him that year to learn Liam Cohen's offense, work with Baker, work with Kyle, then, obviously getting to work with the offensive line, getting to work with, the receivers, just getting comfortable with the team. He could be a long-term backup for Baker. It's not like I think that Michael Pratt's going to go out there when Baker's contract expires and light the world on fire and be, the next greatest quarterback of all time. But he has the skills to keep a team afloat for a couple weeks if their starter is out. He's not going to poop the bed. He's not going to be a detriment to the team like so many other quarterbacks that we've seen across the league. When they come in the game, you're like, well, that's it. They're done. Or, if they're announced as a starter, you say, well, they're losing that game. Pratt's not that kind of guy. So, it's really important, again, back to the youth movement, that if Pratt is in the Bucs' long-term plans, should Kyle Trask decide to go to a different team, try to compete for a starting job next year, which he very well could. Or he may say, you know what? I like it here. I love Baker. I love living in Tampa. I love the organization. I'm going to stick around. That's definitely within the realm of possibility, but the Bucs are preparing for life without Kyle Trask, and they're doing it a year ahead of time so that they don't have to burn draft capital and they don't have to spend additional money that could be used elsewhere. As far as the rest of the practice squad is concerned, I think it's about what many of us expected. Sterling Shepard, Cody Thompson are on there. Ryan Miller, he had a great preseason. Avery Jones is a solid, versatile lineman that can play across the interior. I'm still a little surprised that Xavier Delgado didn't come back, but when they went with 2 offensive linemen, they have one that can play across the interior. Then they have one that is an outside offensive lineman that can play the tackle spots. I get it. You're limited on space. You got one guy that can play 3, one guy that can play 2. You have it covered. And then Vi Jones, who was outstanding throughout camp in the preseason. God forbid one of the linebackers go down, but Vi Jones can step right in and I think be able to play really, really well. So I was happy to see that they were able to bring him back. And then safeties Marcus Banks and Rashad Wisdom, both more than earned the chance to stick around and maybe be called up on more than a few occasions. Both guys made some solid splash plays throughout preseason. They're guys that Bulls can use on special teams if they were to get a game day promotion to the active roster. Even if they don't see the field on defense, they will contribute on special teams. And Jason Licht talked about some of the roster decisions coming down to the fact that they can elevate a player 6 times off the practice squad. So they were confident in keeping just 5 wide receivers, just 3 running backs. And then you look at the kind of positions that they kept a lot of on this practice squad: wide receiver, linebacker, safety, all players where the active roster is either limited or players that can come up and contribute at the very least on special teams if they aren't going to get on the field on offense or defense. So they played the practice squad really, really well. You're taking a shot on a young quarterback that you were interested in the draft process. Then you have guys that, could have probably made, a third of the rosters across the NFL had they not been with the Buccaneers, now getting to stick around on the practice squad. A lot of these guys are going to get activated from the practice squad to the active roster for games throughout the season, especially guys like Sterling Shepard, Cody Thompson, Rashad Wisdom, Marcus Banks, as I mentioned. And then if there's a situation like last year where you saw both Levante David and Devin White go down and miss a game due to injury, and they only had 2 inside linebackers for one game, and then you lose one on the opening series, now they have a little bit of wiggle room there on that practice squad with a guy that played extremely well throughout the preseason and throughout training camp. And then you have another one in Antonio Greer Jr., same thing. I don't think he popped as well as Vi Jones did overall, but he also had a few more of those splash plays. So a couple of guys that can come in and contribute immediately if they are needed. That is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Come back tomorrow. We're going to go live. We're going to go live on YouTube tomorrow. We're going to be talking about Shaq Barrett. I'm sure many of you have already heard about his comments. If not, you're going to want to tune in to the live show. So make sure you're subscribed on YouTube with the notifications turned on. You know when I'm going to go live. You can jump in to the live chat and be part of the show. Please check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Follow on Twitter at LockedOnBucs, at JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. And of course, follow along on YouTube with those notifications turned on or on your favorite podcast platform. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.